I came for a simple visit, but when her eyes met mine, I realized some connections are meant to wait a lifetime. It began with an envelope that seemed almost out of place on my cluttered desk. I hadn't expected anything from my former teacher in years, not since graduation, and yet there it was, neat and handwritten, carrying a warmth that felt personal in a way that email or text never could. My fingers trembled slightly as I broke the seal, curiosity and a strange sense of anticipation coiling in my chest. The note was simple, almost casual, yet the words carried a weight I couldn't ignore. "We've been waiting for you. Come by this weekend. Mrs. A and her friend." My mind raced. Her friend? Who could that be? I remembered my teacher as kind and approachable, never the type to involve students in anything beyond the classroom. And yet, the phrasing, "we've been waiting," felt intimate, deliberate. A tiny thrill of nervous excitement stirred within me, mingled with an unspoken question: what exactly awaited me? The day arrived, and the sky had been weeping lightly all morning, leaving streets glistening with rain-slick reflections of neon signs and passing cars. I parked a little distance away, feeling the damp chill of the evening air on my skin, each breath crisp and charged with anticipation. The house looked unassuming from the outside, a quiet, ivy-draped building with warm light spilling from curtained windows. Yet, even in that brief moment before knocking, my heart beat a little faster, as if it recognized something before I did. The door opened before I could even ring. She was there, her smile the first thing I noticed. A woman in her early 40s, poised yet effortlessly warm, with eyes that held a quiet understanding. She moved with a grace that suggested both confidence and a gentle patience, and for an instant, the world outside melted into soft background noise. "We've been waiting for you," she said, her voice smooth, welcoming, almost teasing in its familiarity. That smile, easy, knowing, stirred something deep inside me, a flutter of emotions I wasn't quite ready to name. Stepping inside, the air felt different, a soft blend of fresh flowers and old books, subtle and comforting. The room smelled of warmth, a space curated for conversation, for closeness. As I followed her through the hallway, I noticed the small, deliberate touches, the way she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, the way her eyes lingered on mine just a heartbeat longer than necessary. My nerves buzzed, but beneath them was a quiet, growing curiosity. It was more than just a visit, it felt like stepping into a story that had been quietly waiting for me to arrive. I realized, almost with a jolt, that her presence carried a gravity, a gentle pull I couldn't, and didn't want to, resist. And as I took my first cautious steps into her world, I felt the first stirrings of something that would grow slowly, deliberately, like a flame that refused to be rushed, promising warmth, tension, and a connection that neither time nor convention could easily define. The living room smelled faintly of vanilla and old books, a comforting combination that seemed to promise both warmth and quiet intimacy. Soft lamplight bathed the room in a honeyed glow, making every shadow gentle, every corner inviting. She motioned toward a plush armchair, her movements smooth and assured, and I found myself marveling at how natural her presence felt, as if she had been expecting me all along. "I hope you like tea," she said, a subtle smile curving her lips. She moved with an ease that betrayed years of self-possession, yet there was a softness in her gestures, a quiet kindness that drew me in. The aroma of freshly brewed tea filled the air as she handed me a delicate cup, our fingers brushing for a moment. The contact was brief, almost accidental, yet it sent a small, electric thrill through me. Her hand lingered just enough for me to notice the warmth, the gentleness, the life lived in those fingers. It was grounding and unsettling all at once. As she settled opposite me, the quiet hum of the music in the background seemed to wrap us in a private world. Her eyes, bright, observant, and teasing, met mine, and I caught the faintest hint of amusement in them. She studied me as one might study a painting, carefully, appreciatively, without judgment. I felt both exposed and safe, a paradox that I couldn't easily name. Our conversation started lightly. She asked about my work, my life since school, and I answered, careful yet eager to impress, aware of the subtle dance of attention between us. Her laughter, soft and genuine, punctuated the sentences, wrapping around my nerves like a bomb. Every so often, her fingers would graze mine as she gestured toward a story, a movement so fleeting it could have been accidental, but in that instant, it was enough. Enough to make me aware of the space between us, the magnetic pull that had quietly begun. I noticed the little details, the curve of her smile as she listened, the tilt of her head when she asked a question, the warmth radiating from her proximity. Her voice lowered slightly when she spoke directly to me, rich and smooth, drawing me closer without words. And in that lowered tone, I felt a depth of attentiveness that went beyond politeness. It was as if she were quietly measuring the space between us, letting the connection grow naturally, deliberately. Beneath the light conversation, I could feel an undercurrent of curiosity, of something unspoken. I was aware of the age gap, of the social norms that might question this closeness, and yet none of it mattered in that moment. What mattered was the subtle intimacy, the shared smiles, the fleeting touches, the way her gaze lingered on me just long enough to make my heart beat faster. By the time the tea was finished, I realized I had been holding my breath without noticing, caught in the pull of her quiet warmth. She had created a space that was inviting, safe, and subtly charged all at once. And as I glanced up at her, catching that same gentle, knowing smile again, I understood, this visit would be more than a simple afternoon. It was the beginning of something slow, profound, and quietly intoxicating, an unspoken story that had been waiting for both of us to arrive. The rain had softened to a gentle drizzle outside, tapping lightly against the windows, filling the room with a quiet rhythm that felt almost meditative. We sank deeper into the couch, a soft blanket draped across our laps, and for the first time, the silence between us didn't feel empty. It felt like space opening for connection, for honesty, for something neither of us was quite ready to name. She began sharing stories of her life, not just the polished moments but the small vulnerabilities she rarely revealed. Tales of missed opportunities, moments of fear, and even heartbreak, told with a smile that carried both resilience and wistfulness. I listened intently, leaning forward just enough to show interest, feeling the warmth of her knee lightly pressing against mine as we laughed together at a particularly funny anecdote. The contact was fleeting but deliberate enough to leave a subtle imprint of closeness, a tactile reminder that this was not ordinary conversation. Her voice was calm, deliberate, yet laced with emotion that was impossible to ignore. I found myself speaking more freely than I had with anyone in months, sharing my own uncertainties and small regrets. Every word I spoke seemed to resonate with her in a way that felt almost tangible. Occasionally, her fingers brushed my wrist as she responded, a fleeting touch that sent a quiet shiver through me. The sensation was grounding, like a tether to this moment, this shared vulnerability. I couldn't help but notice her small gestures, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she laughed, the gentle incline of her head when listening, the way her eyes softened when she caught my gaze. There was a rhythm to her attention, a deliberate patience that made me aware of every nuance in the space between us. Each subtle movement carried meaning, a conversation without words, an invitation to notice, to feel, to linger. And linger I did. I felt the pull of curiosity and desire, not the kind that demanded immediate satisfaction, but the quiet, insistent kind that grows in shared silences, in honest storytelling, in moments that feel suspended between breath and heartbeat. Her warmth was a quiet flame, steady and steadying, drawing me closer without pressure, without expectation. By the time the afternoon waned, the drizzle had turned to mist, and the room seemed wrapped in a soft, diffused glow. I realized how natural it felt to sit so close, to share so much, and yet how intoxicatingly strange it was to feel my heart racing at the gentlest touch or the briefest gaze. The emotional intimacy had grown subtly but unmistakably, weaving threads of trust, curiosity, and something more electric, something that made my chest tighten in the best possible way. As she laughed softly at something I had said, her hand brushed mine again, more deliberately this time. I didn't pull away. Instead, I let the warmth linger, letting the moment stretch, savoring the quiet confirmation that this connection, deliberate, patient, and slowly building, was just beginning to unfurl. In that shared space of stories, touches, and subtle glances, I felt the first true stirrings of a bond that would grow into something far deeper than either of us could yet articulate, a slow, careful dance of emotion, desire, and trust. The sun had broken through the clouds, spilling warm, golden light across her small garden. The soft hum of bees and the faint scent of blooming flowers created an atmosphere that felt suspended between reality and something a little more enchanting. She led me along a narrow path lined with potted plants, each one meticulously cared for, and I noticed the ease in her movements, the natural confidence of someone completely at home in her world. "This one needs pruning," she said, holding out a small pair of shears with a smile that was both instructive and playful. I stepped closer, hands brushing hers as she corrected my grip. The contact was fleeting but deliberate, and I felt a small jolt of warmth shoot through me. It was subtle, just enough to make me aware of her presence, the curve of her body near mine, and the quiet electricity of proximity. Her laughter rang softly as I struggled with the plant, and I couldn't help but be drawn to it. There was something infectious about the way she moved, the way she encouraged me without condescension, the way her eyes sparkled with amusement. Every so often, her hand would graze mine again as we reached for the same branch, a touch so fleeting it could have been accidental, yet lingering just long enough to leave a subtle imprint of connection. We wandered through the garden together, and our conversation shifted seamlessly between playful teasing and deeper reflections. She asked about my favorite childhood memories, and I found myself revealing things I hadn't thought about in years. Her eyes softened as she listened, and I felt a quiet warmth spread through me, a mix of admiration and something more intimate that I wasn't quite ready to define. There was a moment when she stopped, crouching beside a small rose bush, her fingers brushing against mine as we pruned a stubborn branch. I caught her gaze, and for a heartbeat, the garden faded around us. The sunlight caught the edges of her hair, and I noticed the delicate lines of her smile, the subtle warmth in her eyes. I was acutely aware of the distance between us, just enough to feel the tension, just enough to make the moment electric, but the intimacy of the shared task made it feel natural, safe, and thrilling all at once. Her presence was steadying, yet magnetic. I found myself leaning slightly closer, drawn by the quiet pull of curiosity and attraction. Every laugh, every touch, every glance became part of a rhythm, a dance that neither of us needed to name. The garden, the sun, the faint scent of flowers, all of it seemed orchestrated to make the ordinary feel extraordinary, to allow connection to grow without force or expectation. As we stepped back to admire the neat rows of plants, her hand brushed against mine one last time, lingering a moment longer than before. I didn't pull away. Instead, I let the warmth of the touch linger, savoring the unspoken message it carried, a gentle acknowledgement of curiosity, trust, and something quietly tender beginning to take root. And in that shared, sunlit garden, I realized that this connection, slow, deliberate, and charged with playful intimacy, was becoming the most vivid part of my world. Evening had settled softly over the house, turning the windows into mirrors of the warm lamplight inside. We were back in the living room, the couch still draped with the same cozy blanket from earlier, the remnants of teacups on the small table beside us. There was a quiet comfort in the space, a sense of safety that made it easier to let guard down. I could feel it in the slow way she moved, the careful consideration in her gestures, and the softness in her voice that hadn't been there before. She began to speak of moments I hadn't expected, quiet fears, heartbreaks that had shaped her, choices she sometimes regretted. It wasn't dramatic or overwrought, it was honest, unfiltered, human. Her fingers rested lightly near mine on the armrest, close enough for warmth, close enough for me to feel the subtle pressure of reassurance. There was no rush, no expectation, just presence. And in that presence, I realized how much trust she was extending, how much space she was allowing for connection to grow naturally. I listened, captivated not just by her words, but by the rhythm of her breathing, the slight pauses when a memory weighed on her, the soft smile that returned each time she found humor or hope in her stories. I felt compelled to respond, to meet her honesty with my own. Slowly, carefully, I shared my own vulnerabilities, moments of uncertainty, fears of inadequacy, the small regrets that haunted quiet nights. Every confession was met with a gentle nod, a soft smile, an unspoken understanding that made the air between us feel alive yet tender. The intimacy of that moment was almost palpable. Her hand, resting close to mine, seemed to carry a quiet electricity. When our fingers brushed, subtle, almost accidental, I felt a warmth that was equal parts comforting and exhilarating. It wasn't a spark of fleeting desire, it was the deeper thrill of trust, of mutual recognition, of two people slowly letting each other into spaces usually kept private. There were long pauses, comfortable silences filled only by the soft hum of the rain outside, the quiet ticking of a clock, and the gentle sound of our breathing. In those silences, the unspoken tension grew, an awareness of proximity, of lingering glances, of the subtle dance of attention and restraint. Each gesture, each touch, each glance carried meaning, shaping an intimacy that words alone could not convey. By the end of the evening, I felt an undeniable closeness. The quiet vulnerability she had shared, the deliberate patience in her touches, and the subtle warmth in her gaze had woven a bond that felt deep and unbreakable. I realized then that attraction wasn't always a rush of passion, sometimes it was the slow weaving of trust, laughter, honesty, and the kind of attention that made every small touch feel monumental. As I looked at her, a soft sigh escaped my lips, half relief, half awe. She noticed and smiled, the warmth in her eyes holding a promise, that this connection, fragile yet resilient, would grow, evolve, and perhaps one day become something neither of us could have anticipated but both of us had been waiting for. Night had fully settled outside, the room bathed in the soft flicker of the fireplace. Shadows danced gently along the walls, painting the space in golden hues that made every movement seem intimate, deliberate, and charged with quiet anticipation. We sat close on the couch, a comfortable silence stretching between us, but the air itself seemed heavier, more aware, like it was holding its breath along with us. She reached out, gently brushing a loose strand of hair behind my ear. The touch was simple, almost casual, yet it carried weight. The warmth of her fingers lingered on my skin, sending a small thrill through me, subtle but undeniable. Her hand rested there for a heartbeat longer than necessary, and I felt the tension coil between us, delicate, magnetic, and unspoken. Her gaze met mine, steady and searching. There was a softness in her eyes that made me ache to reach closer, and yet a restraint that mirrored my own hesitation. The age difference, the social boundaries, and the weight of propriety all lingered in the back of my mind, but none of it diminished the pull I felt toward her. Instead, it sharpened it, made every gesture, every glance, every heartbeat more pronounced, more significant. I noticed the small, deliberate movements she made, the way she shifted slightly toward me, the gentle incline of her shoulders, the way her fingers tapped lightly on the armrest near mine. Each gesture was a question, an invitation, a silent negotiation of boundaries and desire. I felt the urge to respond, to close the small distance, to let the warmth of her presence fully surround me, but I hesitated, aware that this moment, fragile and perfect, needed patience. The silence stretched, but it was not empty. It was filled with awareness, the subtle scent of her perfume mixing with the faint smoke of the fire, the soft crackle of flames punctuating the quiet, the way our breathing seemed to sync without conscious effort. In that space, every flicker of expression, every micro-movement carried meaning. Each time our eyes met, a new layer of tension unfolded, a reminder of what was possible if we dared to reach beyond restraint. She shifted again, closer this time, and her hand lightly grazed mine on the armrest. It was the kind of contact that made time slow, that made ordinary moments feel monumental. I felt my pulse quicken, a delicate mixture of anticipation, desire, and fear. We were both aware of the precipice, the point where restraint and surrender balanced on a razor's edge, and yet neither of us moved to tip the scale too quickly. Finally, she leaned back slightly, her smile soft, knowing, and just a little teasing. It was as if she acknowledged the unspoken tension, the delicate electricity that hummed between us, and invited me to stay in the moment rather than rush it. And in that careful, deliberate hesitation, I understood something crucial: intimacy was not just in action, but in restraint, in shared glances, in touches that lingered just long enough to make the heart ache. That night, the moment of hesitation became a promise, a silent agreement that what we were building, slow and deliberate, was worth savoring. The pull between us had reached its peak, but it was tempered with patience, trust, and the knowledge that the warmth we were nurturing would carry us further than any impulsive rush ever could. Morning arrived quietly, spilling golden sunlight through the windows and bathing the room in a soft, gentle glow. The fire from last night had dwindled to faint embers, leaving the space warm but calm. We sat close together on the couch, the blanket from previous days still draped across our laps. The intimacy of shared silences lingered, but it no longer felt tense. It was comforting, familiar, and full of quiet contentment. She handed me a cup of fresh coffee, our fingers brushing briefly as I accepted it. The contact was light, but it carried all the weight of the moments we had shared, the laughter, the stories, the subtle touches, and the long, lingering glances that had built a slow, unspoken bond. I looked into her eyes and saw the same warmth and understanding reflected back at me. It was a gaze that acknowledged the complexity of our connection, the age difference, the societal norms, the hesitations, but celebrated the undeniable intimacy and trust we had nurtured. We sipped our coffee in comfortable silence, the aroma curling around us like an invisible thread connecting our shared space. The quiet was punctuated only by soft laughter at a small joke or a teasing comment, the kind that made ordinary moments feel extraordinary. Her hand found mine again, this time more deliberately, and I held it without hesitation, feeling the steady warmth and reassurance of her presence. The playful touches, the careful glances, the shared stories, all of it had built a bridge between us, one made not of impulsive desire but of genuine connection, trust, and patience. Her fingers brushed mine as she adjusted the blanket, her touch light but lingering just enough to make my heart tighten with the quiet thrill of closeness. I realized then that the attraction we shared was more than surface level. It was the deep, steady pull of emotional intimacy combined with a subtle, mutual understanding that we belonged in each other's worlds, even if life had brought us together slowly and deliberately. She smiled, soft and knowing, a gesture that seemed to hold every unspoken word between us. "I'm glad you came," she said quietly. It wasn't a declaration, it was a gentle acknowledgement, a shared truth that needed no embellishment. I responded with a soft smile, my chest warm with the weight of unspoken feelings finally allowed to rest in the light of mutual understanding. By the time the morning had fully unfolded, our touches and glances had normalized into the comfortable rhythm of two people who had discovered a connection worth nurturing. The tension that had lingered through previous days had transformed into warmth, into trust, into a sense of possibility that felt both thrilling and safe. I realized that slow-burn romance was not about rushing to a climax, it was about savoring the journey, building intimacy carefully, and allowing each small gesture to deepen the bond. As I lingered beside her, coffee in hand, I felt the culmination of our shared moments, laughter, vulnerability, playful touches, and hesitation, all converging into a quiet, steady flame of affection. The story had reached its natural resolution, leaving both of us fulfilled, hopeful, and profoundly connected. In her presence, I knew that what we had was real, enduring, and ready to grow, one deliberate, gentle moment at a time. If this story of patience, connection, and quiet longing touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Click the bell icon so you never miss a slow burn romance that lingers in your heart long after the video ends.